Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. To set the stage, I used to live in a big but not huge city. Let's call it Palmville. I lived near the corner of a dense suburb nestled between overstuffed apartment buildings, a river that smelled like diesel when at low tide, and two busy highways. I was a minority in this neighborhood, and I caught a lot of heat for it. People didn't really like white people there, but enough of our neighbors were accepting of us that aside from a few disagreements between families and the beatings that came with them, I didn't feel like I was in danger when leaving my home. It was a rough neighborhood, but it was my home and it protected its own. The community center was like a temple, and let's call her AM was the priestess. In our neighborhood, she was respected like a living deity, and her calm and understanding reflected her status. I never once saw her behave without a strong moral code. And the final piece to set this stage, our former landlord. Short Asian lady in all the stereotypical ways, kind and sweet. Our house was above my parents' pay grade, and she knew it. She went out of her way to find house repair and maintenance jobs for tenants that were having money problems. She'd pay them by taking chunks out of their rent, oftentimes a bit larger than how much the work they did was worth. Looking back, that was probably illegal. But that's irrelevant because she died. The circumstances surrounding her death were suspect, but none of the suspects play a part in this story, so there's no need to go into detail on it. Her sons, who wanted nothing to do with real estate, took over the business. They couldn't make heads or tails of how she managed to float books with so much red in them and began dumping properties. Ours was on that list. I harbor no ill will towards them and still wish them the best, but the guy who bought the house entered the sociopath and today's victim. This guy wasted no time in making our lives hell. His first action was to raise the rent. Apparently, when the account changed hands, he was allowed to update the rent to modern pricing. We'd been there for several years, and were paying below market even from the onset, so this was a huge blow by itself. The second blow came when he said that the rent had to be ready, in full, on the first of every month. No partial payments, no work to reduce it, no extensions. Full rent on the first of the month, or an eviction notice on the second. This was hemorrhaging our savings, but we were surviving for the moment. Meanwhile, AM had lobbied hard for the city to co-fund a revival project to renovate the entire aging suburb, and she succeeded. One street at a time had conga lines of work trucks almost every day, and people were getting old leaky pipes replaced, sinkholes in yards patched, fences repaired, paint renewed. It was an amazing thing. And an enticing thing for the sociopath. Being at the corner of the neighborhood, our house was on the last street on the list, and sociopath wanted us out so he could relist the house after renovation. He never said this directly, but multiple conversations made his intent clear even for 10-year-old me. Random inspections, overhyping of minor problems with the house, even so far as trying to bring us up on completely false animal abuse charges because our cat was attacked by what we believe was a raccoon, and he tried to claim we did it. Yeah, because a vet can't figure out the difference between knife wounds and a mauling. We read the writing on the wall and began preparations to move. We decided to move in with my oldest brother in a place I'll call Banjo Land. Most of us had moved except my other brother, who stayed behind because he still had a lot of social ties in Palmville, and his new job meant if he cut corners, he could keep paying sociopaths inflated bills. Well, despite his best efforts, he came up $20 short 1 month, and sociopath jumped on it. He had 30 days. We made the 400-mile trip from Banjo Land to Palmville to get the rest of our stuff, and I can't say as I approved of my brother's living conditions, but I guess that's beside the point. The month passed rather uneventfully. I guess sociopath figured he'd won, so there was no need to burn the gas to drive out and gloat. The neighborhood had learned what was going on, and that was the first time I'd ever been back in that neighborhood where I didn't get a single call-out, a single glare, a single racist remark. Everybody behaved reverently. It was kind of disturbing in all honesty. I guess people in lower incomes all know what eviction means and felt like I was having a bad enough time already. Well, 20 days later, he says it's time to leave. We still had a week left, but it didn't matter. We didn't have the money to try fighting it with a lawyer. AM descended from the heavens and bought us a couple of extra days, but it was evident he really, really wanted us out, possibly because the work trucks were now 1 street away. The last time I ever saw the house I grew up in, Workmen were throwing my childhood possessions into a large bin when we supposedly still had 3 days left to leave. Everything that follows is a collection of information I got through the grapevine and phone calls with people present at the events. Immediately, Sociopath moved into the house himself. Why, you may ask? People who owned the homes they were living in were getting the full cost of renovations comped by the city. He figured that by moving in himself, he'd be able to get this house he bought at liquidation price renovated for free and flip it. AM was having none of it. She explained to him that at the time the revival project was approved, that house was a rental lot and they can't change the budget now. She then explained to him that the partial cost coverage that had been approved for the lot was in our name, not his, and he wasn't eligible for partial cost comping either. He'd have to pay every penny himself, and since the entire neighborhood was getting a facelift, he was required to at least renovate the exterior. Otherwise, she'd see the house condemned as an eyesore or dilapidated or whatever the legal term is. He went really cheap on the renovations, basically put in new carpets and a coat of paint. This would later come to bite him in the ass. He then began trying to sell the house in earnest. The neighborhood remembered what he'd done. There were vandalisms when nobody was there, and loud noises from the neighbors when people were there to look at the house over, and any time a prospective buyer asked around, they got the full stink eye from anybody they talked to. They made sure he simply couldn't get that house sold at market value. After 3 months of this, he lowered the listing price. Then a month later, he lowered it again and finally got a bite. AM personally made sure he had to file every single piece of paperwork before it changed hands. Every single part of the house had to be inspected thoroughly. And that's when Karma herself caught up with him. In his hasty and cheap renovations, he'd somehow damaged the pipes. Black mold. AM remembered how he'd treated us, and she decided to pay him back in kind. I never heard how exactly she pulled it off, but she managed to delay him getting the news about the black mold being discovered for several days, long enough that by the time he did get the news, he didn't have enough time left to try getting it cleaned or make a last-ditch effort to save the house. The house was condemned days later. In their final act, AM and members of the neighborhood filed every single complaint and injunction they could, and arranged for him to be compelled by the city to demolish the house immediately, a cost he had to pay out of his own pocket. He tried to destroy a family and broke laws just to make some quick cash, and instead was left fighting a year-long legal battle and ended up losing thousands. The neighborhood remembers, the neighborhood punishes. The next one is an entitled people story. Hey there, my name is Sarah, and I have a story to tell about my neighbor Jessica. I live in a suburban neighborhood in the northeastern United States. It's a nice area with well-kept houses and friendly neighbors. My husband and I have lived here for over a decade, and we've always gotten along well with everyone on our block. A few years ago, we decided to add an in-ground swimming pool to our backyard. We had always wanted one, and we finally had the money to make it happen. We hired a reputable pool company and started the construction process. At first, everything was going smoothly. The construction workers were friendly and professional, and they were making great progress on the pool. We were excited to finally have a place to relax and cool off during the hot summer months. But then, things started to go wrong. One day, we came home to find that someone had dumped a ton of dirt and debris into the pool. It was a huge mess, and we had no idea how it had happened. We suspected that someone had deliberately sabotaged our pool, but we didn't know who or why. We decided to clean up the mess and move forward with the pool construction, but we were on high alert for any other signs of sabotage. A few days later, we noticed that our neighbor Jessica had been acting strangely. She would glare at us whenever we were outside and would make snide comments under her breath. We had always been friendly with Jessica, so we didn't know why she was suddenly acting this way. One afternoon, while my husband and I were sitting outside enjoying the sun, Jessica stormed over to our yard and started yelling at us. She accused us of putting the pool on her property and demanded that we take it down immediately. We were shocked and confused. We had made sure to follow all the necessary regulations and had the property surveyed before starting the construction. We knew that the pool was on our property, not hers. But Jessica was relentless. She kept insisting that the pool was on her property and threatened to take legal action if we didn't remove it. We tried to reason with her and show her the property survey, but she wouldn't listen. Finally, we decided to hire a lawyer to help us deal with the situation. We didn't want to escalate things, but we also didn't want to be bullied out of having our dream pool. After a few weeks of back and forth with Jessica and her lawyer, it was determined that the pool was indeed on our property. We were relieved, but also frustrated that we had to go through all this trouble to prove something that was so obvious. The pool construction was completed without any further incidents, and we were finally able to enjoy it. We invited our neighbors over for a pool party, and everyone had a great time. But we still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Jessica. A few weeks later, we came home from a weekend trip to find that someone had poured a ton of chemicals into our pool. The water was bright green and smelled terrible. We immediately called the pool company, and they determined that the chemicals were toxic and had caused significant damage to the pool. We knew that it had to be Jessica. She was the only one who had been acting strange and hostile towards us, and this was too much of a coincidence. We called the police and reported the incident, but there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence. We were devastated. We had spent so much money and time on the pool, and now it was completely ruined. We decided to take legal action against Jessica, but we knew that it would be a long and difficult process. Eventually, after months of legal battles, we were able to prove that Jessica had indeed sabotaged our pool. She was ordered to pay for the damages and was also fined for trespassing and vandalism. We were relieved that justice had been served, but we were also saddened by the fact that our relationship with our once friendly neighbor had deteriorated so much. But the story doesn't end there. About a year after the incident, we received a letter in the mail from Jessica. In the letter, she apologized for her behavior and explained that she had been going through a difficult time in her life. She had been struggling with depression and anxiety, and had become convinced that we were out to get her. She had never intended to cause us harm, but her mental state had clouded her judgment. We were surprised by the letter, but also touched by Jessica's vulnerability and honesty. We decided to meet with her and hear her out. We had no intention of becoming friends with her again, but we wanted to give her a chance to explain herself and make amends. We met with Jessica at a local coffee shop, and she opened up to us about her struggles. We listened and offered support and encouragement. It was a difficult conversation, but also a healing one. In the end, we were able to forgive Jessica for what she had done. We knew that mental illness can be a powerful force, and that it can cause people to do things they wouldn't normally do. We also knew that we didn't want to hold on to anger and resentment. Today, Jessica and her family have moved away from our neighborhood, but we still keep in touch with her. She has gotten the help she needed for her mental health issues and is doing much better. We're glad that we were able to find a way to move past the hurt and come out stronger as a community. The experience taught us a lot about forgiveness and empathy, and we're grateful for that lesson. We also installed even more security measures to protect our property just in case. But we know that sometimes the best way to move forward is to let go of the past and focus on the present. The next one is a petty revenge story. This may be the pettiest thing I have ever done in my life. I'm a pretty petty person and I also believe in malicious compliance, but this takes the cake. So, I bought a condo in a building in a large city in the US about 2.5 years ago. The building has a homeowners association, HOA, that we all pay into monthly. Since I've lived here, the building has rapidly deteriorated, and we have all hired an attorney for a class action style lawsuit. I'm talking broken elevators, broken rooftop AC units. The pool was empty for 4 months during the summer, etc. The people in the building are great, though, and we are a friendly bunch. Last year, I took the HOA to small claims court because they failed to provide financial documents that show us how our fees are being spent. As this is a legal requirement for all HOAs in my state, I won the case and was awarded the $30 filing fee plus $1 symbolic. I sued for documents, not money. The fact that they can't provide the docs as they are legally required to do is a separate issue among others, including possible wrongdoing, that we've hired the attorneys for. I have asked the HOA to pay the $31 to me, and the president of the HOA wants to either meet me somewhere private to give it to me, or he wants to mail me a satisfaction of judgment form, have me sign it and mail it back to him, and then he will mail me a check. No to both. 3 days after I won the case, the HOA announced that they were going to charge us all a special assessment of about $1,000 each, and an increase in our monthly dues of 10%. In my state, a membership vote gets triggered if you charge a special assessment that brings the building more than 5% its yearly income, which means 51% of the owners must approve the assessment for it to take effect. As this dollar is about 20% of our yearly income, a vote should have taken place. When we asked about this vote, the HOA said that it was being made under an emergency clause, which means that the membership vote doesn't have to take place. The emergency? Fixing the elevator that broke on December 24th, 2021. The spirit of the emergency clause is for things like fire, earthquake, flood, etc., not a broken elevator that has been broken for a year already. When there was understandable pushback, the HOA sent out a little email stating that anyone who didn't pay the assessment would have a lien put on their unit. The liens came down yesterday on those that couldn't pay $1,000 on short notice. Our attorneys told us that even though the money is in dispute, we still have to pay it, and I did pay mine, but we also have a lot of retirees/lower income people in the building. The HOA president's house is currently on the market for $20,000. I just got back from the courthouse where I filed a $31 lien against it for $140, clouding its title. It's a matter of principle, not money. Now the title can't change hands until he pays me my $31, and I am perfectly within my rights to collect on a judgment owed. The next one is an entitled people story. A couple of years ago, my DH and I bought a house from the city council. We had seen it, loved everything about it and the neighborhood. Inspection showed that everything, apart from the central heating boiler, was in good order. We still needed to replace the central heating boiler. We also renovated the bathroom and stairs, and we placed a new kitchen. Between then and now, we have invested money in our home. Among other things, we placed solar panels, renovated the front and back garden, and renovated our downstairs toilet. For reference, we have lived here for around 6 years now, and we have no intention of moving. Apart from the fact that we have put a lot of money into the house, we love the neighborhood, our neighbors, and the fact that we are close to family and friends. The way the council sold houses went as follows. The house was up for sale for 6 weeks. If you were interested, you could schedule a visit with the real estate agent, place a bid if you wanted, and then after the 6 weeks, the city council would look at all the bids and see who offered the most. 2 weeks ago, I was home when a lady rang the doorbell. She introduced herself and told me that when the house came up for sale all those years ago, she and her husband were interested. They could see the potential, but their bid was rejected. She was enthusiastic about how it looked now, from what she could see, and how beautiful the garden was, how wonderful the solar panels were and such. So I thanked her for her compliments and waited for the reason why she rang the doorbell. She told me that since they had more money saved, she and her husband wanted to know if we were interested in selling them the house. I told her that we were not interested. She started whining and gave an offer, and I told her the same. Not interested at all. More whining ensued, and she made a new offer. I kindly drew the line and said that she can offer all she wants. We love living here, and we want to enjoy our home with the family we've built in it. Then I told her that I had things to do, wished her a good day, and closed the door. I had barely turned around when she started ringing the doorbell continuously. So I opened the door and asked her what she needed to say. She told me this, almost verbatim. "You need to sell us this house. You have lived here for some years now. My husband and children deserve a nice house like this. I gave you 2 offers that are very reasonable. It's our turn now, so sell us the house. We want to live here." I told this woman that her offers were laughable. She gave 2 offers while we knew that we could ask for double the price and get that still. She lowballed. I reiterated that we were not interested and would not sell the house. I asked her to leave and close the door again. Like before, she started ringing the doorbell like a madwoman. After trying to ignore it, I ripped open the front door and shouted in her face for her to get lost. We are not interested. Even if we were, I would not sell my house to her since she's acting like a spoiled brat. I wouldn't want my neighbors to deal with her spoiled attitude. I told her that she doesn't need to think about trying to bully us into moving and to get the duck away, or I would call the police. This time I slammed the door to get the message across. She stayed, screaming at the door that we have to sell the house to her, and walked around a bit before leaving. I did send a message in our streets group app about her. People have said to keep an eye out for her. My DH was stunned when I told him this, since this is not a normal thing in our country to do. She has been seen once or twice, but has not caused problems for us or anyone else. The next one is an entitled parent story. I work at a car dealership as a receptionist, and one of my duties is to greet customers when they enter. I am also a professional artist on the side and have been busy with some commissions lately. Since it's not busy at the dealer, I started working on my iPad mini. It's old and I'm working on upgrading, but I currently can't afford it. So I live with it despite the battery life being really short, and I have to keep it plugged in at all times. During my lunch break, I was in the waiting area doing more work when a kid, a little girl no older than 4, came up and watched me work. This happens a lot when I draw in public, and usually the kids just ask a lot of questions. But this NG, nice girl, was very quiet and just had a look of amazement, so I let her be. Her mother, the EM in the story, was nearby at a salesman's desk working on purchasing a new car, which is a long and no doubt boring process. The salesman working with her walked away, which at my dealership they do very often to retrieve paperwork, talk to the sales finance managers, etc. She looks over at me and her kid and asks her, "What are you looking at?" Her kid points at my screen and says, "She's painting puppies!" I was working on Twitch emotes of a streamer's dog. I sort of show my screen to EM and she then asks her kid if she wants to draw, which the girl excitedly said yes. I expected EM to pull out paper and pencils or at least ask if I can get some for her too, but she just looked at me expectantly. When I realized she was waiting for me to hand her my iPad, I said, "Oh, she can't use mine, but I can get her a notepad and pens." But apparently that wasn't good enough. She sighs and says, "Just let her draw a little bit. I'm almost done here anyway," which I knew for a fact wasn't true. They were waiting for bank approval for a loan, which can take anywhere between 5-30 minutes, and even then, they'll be here longer for finance paperwork, detailing, etc. I start to explain that this is part of my work, and she scoffs, saying I'm just doodling puppies, and it was selfish that I wouldn't let NG doodle on my device too. Poor NG was just looking at her hands, looking quite embarrassed. I then pretended my lunch was over and got up to spend the rest of my lunch at my desk. I couldn't see her behind a huge truck on display, but I could hear her grumble to NG about who knows what. Whatever, pretend like I didn't hear so I don't mess up this sale for my coworker. Sometime later, nature called me, and I got up to use the restroom. I left my iPad on my seat so it'll stay plugged in and put a notepad over it to try to cover it up somehow. My desk is a wide crescent shape with no drawers to keep my things safe, so this was the best I could do to somewhat hide it. I was in the restroom no longer than 3 minutes, but when I got back, only my charger remained. My iPad and Apple Pencil were gone. I looked over to the lady who had her large purse suspiciously in her lap now instead of on the floor beside her chair like it was before. I was panicked because a lot of my work is on that iPad that I needed. I went to my sales manager, SM, and told him the situation. He told me he would take care of it, but to be patient for now. I went back to my desk full of anxiety and my stomach doing backflips. SM went to the desk where EM was to work out the deal. They're far enough that I can hear their voices, but not pinpoint what they're saying. But I did hear her eventually yell, "How dare you! I would never steal! Do you want to lose this sale?" I immediately got up and went over behind the lady so SM could see me, but she couldn't. He tells her he understands, but my iPad went missing and he wants to make sure no one currently in the building has it. That's when I remembered the Find My feature on all Apple products. My iPad was connected to the dealer's Wi-Fi, so I pulled out my iPhone and pressed play sound for my iPad. Her purse started dinging. She tried to play it off as if it's her ringtone, and SM stared at her as if daring her to answer it. The thing is, with the play sound feature, if I keep pressing it, it will keep pinging. I made my presence known and told her to give my iPad back. That's when she stopped playing dumb and just said, "Just let NG have it, her birthday is coming up and I can't afford a present for her since I'm getting this car." SM said he was happy to cancel the deal so she can instead buy a birthday present for her child and to return my iPad, or he'll call the police. She practically threw my iPad at me where it hit me in the gut, and took NG from the waiting area to leave. Poor thing looked at me with the most apologetic look on her face before leaving with her mother. SM might have helped me, but he's not exactly the nicest person. From now on, I'm not allowed to bring my iPad to the dealer. I have to either leave it in my car or leave it at home. Whatever. EM took my Apple Pencil with her since she left in a hurry, so I'm gonna stop by the Apple store after work to get a new one. But until then, I'm stuck with my pens and notepad. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.